It all started when a company called EnviroKlenz reached out to me. They offered to send me one of their air purifiers and then let me make any kind of a video I wanted with it. To which I replied, okay. So I decided that the first thing I wanted to do with the EnviroKlenz that they sent me was to put it through a ridiculously over-the-top challenge, like putting it into a confined space and then filling it with tons of smoke. In order to do this, I needed to build an indoor test chamber, and I decided to make it out of an old projection screen television. I just so happened to have one that I had gotten for free on Craigslist a while back, and I had already gutted it for parts. I wanted to fill the chamber with colorful smoke, and a lot of it, so I bought 16 neon smoke tubes, as well as 20 feet of spare fuse for connecting them all together. The plastic top was placed onto a metal sheet for fire safety. I aligned the smoke tubes on either side of the air purifier and affixed them to the base with hot glue. I routed the fuse through the tubes so that it would fire in a color gradient series, in the order of red, yellow, green, and then blue. This is incredibly dangerous, and I would never recommend someone do something like this. With a fire extinguisher on hand, my wife and I lit the fuses sticking out of each side, covered the fuse holes, and then turned on the purifier. Yeah, that's okay. Here it is from start to finish with the footage sped way up. The screen was permanently stained, so I only knew it was done once it wouldn't get any clearer visually, at which point I opened it up. Speaking of stained, everything inside the chamber was. I think I just invented the Fallout edition of the EnviroKlenz Air Purifier. Yikes! You can see the deposits everywhere except for where the purified air was coming out of the vents. I gave the EnviroKlenz a well-deserved cleaning and opened it up to take a look at the most disgusting filter I have ever seen. This brings me to one of the first things that I actually really like about the EnviroKlenz compared to, say, some of these other air purifiers that I actually already owned. Let's face it, it's a beige box. It's not going to win any beauty awards. The thing I like about the EnviroKlenz is that it's purely a beast of function. These nicer looking units are sort of like a new Kia. They look good, but just good enough to not be ugly. But if you're going to war on air pollutants, wouldn't you rather have a tank? And this thing is a tank. I actually accidentally dropped it. It really was an accident. I had it on like a raised surface, and it's on wheels, and I wasn't being careful, and sure enough, boom, it hit the ground. And the thing actually did more damage to my floor than the fall did to the EnviroKlenz. Seriously, you can hardly tell that it was dropped. One of the ways that you can tell that the EnviroKlenz was built for function, as opposed to these and other more aesthetic models on the market, is the fact that it is a box. In order to understand that, we need to take a closer look at the filters. All of these filters are HEPA filters, which basically means that the material that they're made of is full of tiny, tiny holes, so small that they remove almost everything from the air that passes through it. But where they differ is in size. The round filter is obviously much smaller, since it's for a more compact model. But the two rectangular filters look very similar, until you turn them sideways, that is. The EnviroKlenz is much deeper than the other filter, and when it comes to air filter, you definitely want to go deep dish versus thin crust. Filters with a good amount of depth to them are able to pack a lot more surface area into the filter. If I take a folded sheet of paper that's similar to the thinner filter, and then I stretch it out, you can see all the hidden surface area, but it's not a lot. If you look at the EnviroKlenz filter, even with much fewer folds, when you stretch those out, it's much larger. If we take apart the filter that we used for the smoke test, and remove the spacers that are in between the sheets of the material, we can lay out all the sheets of material in order to see just how much surface area is actually contained inside this little box. It took much longer than I expected to lay out every single sheet, and all of the sheets, except for those at the very ends of the filter, were completely saturated with the murky colored smoke residue, showing just how much filth that this filter had actually pulled out of the air. This is why I love that the EnviroKlenz is a big beige box. It's because they can really maximize the amount of surface area that they get to pass the air through. Filters with more surface area can allow more air to pass through with less resistance. It's sort of like if you tried to empty your lungs by blowing through a straw. Blowing through a single straw creates a lot of resistance, and it takes a while for the air to pass through. Whereas if I take a whole bunch of straws, I can empty my lungs almost instantly by blowing through them because there's so little resistance. This is why you want to have as much material as possible in your filter. You can move way more air through it, and it's going to last a lot longer than other filters. Another thing that I really like about the EnviroKlenz are the ultraviolet lights that shine onto the collection side of the HEPA filter. Imagine that these zombie toys that you see are a bunch of mold and bacteria in the air, and that this fence that they encounter is the HEPA filter. The fence easily stops the zombies, but they are still alive, dangerous, and scratching their heads, plotting a way to escape. This is where the ultraviolet light comes in, which is represented by this giant ominous machine sneaking up behind them. You see, things like mold and bacteria are vulnerable to UV light, much in the same way that zombies are vulnerable to a flamethrower. It's amazing to see this thing still chugging along after it being bombarded with smoke and being dropped. No, not that time. I dropped it again. Even the UV light bulbs that were inside of it during both times it was dropped, they still work fine, and I would have expected them to break before anything else. In all seriousness, EnviroKlenz has been great to work with. They approached me, they were like, hey, here's our unit, we stand by it, we love it, we want you to do whatever you want with it. It's been really fun to do something outlandish and over the top. It's a solid unit. If you or somebody you know is in need of an air purifier, I highly recommend that you check out the EnviroKlenz. And if you do decide to buy one, make sure that you use the link that I have in the description below. And by the way, if you don't like beige, they do have it in black.